So a very good morning to those of you who are here live for the Zoom, and for those joining us on YouTube later, then good morning or good afternoon or good evening, wherever you are. And so today is the first of three teachings on the Buddha. And it's the first of, I think, 9 teachings on Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. So they go together. And so because we're beginning not just today's session, but we're beginning these 3 sessions and then these 9 sessions, then it's a very, very important time to start well, really super well, with an excellent motivation and with, well, as many of you know, 3 key qualities. First of all, to try and make as big a mind as we can. And by big, we mean inclusive. And so we try to feel that we're here with an aim to benefit as many sentient beings as we can possibly imagine, and very particularly those very real sentient beings that have been and are still in our own lives, our family, our parents, friends, enemies, those who've really been part of our recent karma. So we try to have a mind that reaches as far as you can imagine your mind reaching, and being sensitive to the condition of our fellow human beings, the animals, and then the other beings we're not usually aware of. And they're not just on this planet, but in all the different types of worlds. So a big mind. And then second quality, very, very loving mind. And so whoever they are and whatever they're doing, these sentient beings, even the worst ones and the evil ones and the nasty ones, whoever they are, we think of them with great love, as much love. We try and feel as much love for everybody as we do for those we love the most at present. More than that, we think of the beautiful love of the bodhisattva and of the Buddhas. We try and feel that for everybody. So a big mind and a loving mind. And then last but not least, a happy mind. And happy because, well, we're here, we're still alive, we're human. We have a human life. And our human life has been awakened to its loving potential, its Buddha potential, to the wonderful teachings of the Buddha, the true teachings, the reliable teachings, trustworthy teachings that the Buddha gave this world. And the fact that we have another day of opportunity to improve everything we are through the Buddha's teaching, which is forever. It's you forever. And everything else in our life, the worldly things, they're temporary. They come, they go. That's always how it is. But life after life in the future depends on what we do now in this life. And Dharma is our very, very, very best friend. And that should make us super happy and also super compassionate for those who don't have Dharma. So with those thoughts in mind, then we do our starting prayers. We take refuge in the Buddha, in the Dharma, and in the community of most noble minds. From this moment on, until we reach the very heart of enlightenment. Through the practice of generosity and all six transcendent virtues, may we reach total awakening and every enlightened quality to be able to truly help sentient beings so lost in samsara. May each and every being be well, live long, be healthy, be well provided for, have good friends, find respect, live in places of peace and plenty, and most of all, may they practice Dharma. May they each create the causes for these good circumstances to be their wealth in future lives. May they be free from suffering and from creating causes of future suffering. May they discover the natural, sacred well-being that is totally beyond suffering, and attain the great equanimity that is free of closeness or distance from anyone.
Deyata shame shamavati shameta shatru kurimam kurimare jite karota keyore tejovati uloyane bishuda nimale malapana ye kukure kaka grase grasana Omuki paramuki amuki shamdavane sawa graha bandhanane negri hitva Sawa bhava pravadina vimukta marapasha savitva buddha mudra Anugatita sava mare putsarita parishuddhe bhigashantu sava mara kamane. Glorious Guru, source of all blessing, ever present above our heads on lotus and moon seat, through your immense kindness, ever sustain us, that the accomplishments of body, speech, and mind flow from you, and we are one. So, as I mentioned in the little 15 minutes we have of catch up and chat before the actual formal teaching starts, this is a rather daunting course for me, and you wouldn't think so. We just had a year of teachings on Mahamudra and the six paramitas, and in particular Prajna Paramita. So these are very high-flying topics, and so you'd think after all of that, coming back to the Buddha is very, how can you say, simple, very basic. Far from it, far from it. This is the hardest one, for me anyway, maybe it's just me, but it is the hardest one. It's important that we know what we can know, but what we can know is very limited. This is the problem. You see, if it was strawberry ice cream, then it will be very easy for me to talk to you about it, and you can go and taste it, and no problem at all. But Buddha is the deepest, the most vast, the most sublime, and so far beyond the things we experience in this world. And I remember Akon Rinpoche on many occasions talking to people, on several occasions to me, talking about refuge and taking refuge. He said, you'll only 100% take refuge when you're a Buddha, because until we're Buddha, we don't know what Buddha is. It's very strange. We take refuge in Buddha, not really knowing very much about Buddha at all. And more than that, if you're on the bodhisattva path, you're praying your socks off every day. May I become Buddha to help all sentient beings. So if somebody, your next door neighbor who's not a Buddhist, says, oh, right, so you're longing to become a Buddha. What is that? Duh. And I wonder, when we start this course, just if I say the word Buddha, or if you read the word Buddha, actually what happens in your mind? What comes up? What kind of image? What kind of feeling? What is just now Buddha for you? So anyway, I'm going to present over 3 teachings, some very classical material about Buddha, and we're going to approach Buddha from 3 angles. Notice I'm not saying the Buddha, I'm saying Buddha. We're going to approach Buddha from 3 main angles. The first, which may seem the easiest, but it's not, is the historical Buddha, Gautama, Shakyamuni, 2,600 years ago, and so on. The life of the Buddha, what he did, how he taught. And so when, like in temples all over the world, when people take refuge, they go in front of a statue of Shakyamuni, of Gautama, and somehow in front of this block of metal or stone or wood, then they take refuge. It's not easy because what we know about the Buddha is all very mixed up and debatable. We'll come to that this morning. You can't say this is definitely the story of the Buddha, from the Buddha's own mouth, 100% for sure, guaranteed how it was. Like so many stories, it seems to have developed over the centuries. So anyway, that's one angle. It's the person who gave this world the Dharma teachings that have worked and flourished up until the present day and that we're receiving. So it's kind of the founder of our faith, like Jesus, like Muhammad, and so on. We think of the Buddha in that way. And we take refuge as the finest, purest, wisest, most peaceful, most compassionate person who ever graced this planet. We're quite elitist in a way. We're going for the best. Whoever was the best of the best, whoever came, then that's the one we want to follow. So there's Buddha from that point of view. The second approach is not so much what that Buddha, that person did, if we think of Buddha as a person, but what they became. They became a Buddha. So the Buddha is important for us because he became a Buddha. And that's what we hope to become, a Buddha. And a Buddha doesn't necessarily need to be in India in that kind of a time period. Who knows? Now we're spreading out over the cosmos. Maybe it will be on the planet Mars, in our future humans, whatever. But when we become a Buddha, what do we become? So we analyze that through the 3 kayas, Dhammakaya, Sambhogakaya, Nimanakaya, the 3 key aspects of what we call Buddha. That's our second approach. It is what we become, how can you say, cosmically. The first approach is the person. The second approach is what is Buddha cosmically.
The third approach is in terms of our own mind. It's not out there in the whole cosmos. It's not back there in history. It's in here, inside ourselves as our potential. And what does becoming Buddha mean? In that case, who can do it? How is it done? And so on. So there are all the teachings on Buddha nature. More or less, we'll be doing those three approaches week by week in this course. So today is mainly a focus on the historical Buddha, which for me is, in a way, is the hardest of those three. Buddha nature, so it's profound, but it's so easy to talk about. Why? Because I have Maitreya's, where are they? They're not, you can't see them, they're up there. Maitreya's 400 and plus verses about Buddha nature. 17 years of my life translating that, very familiar, so I can just follow the structure like a parrot and share it with you. That's easy. The second one, the three kayas, we have all the teachings, especially Gampopa's teachings, very clear. This kaya, 5 key qualities, 5 other qualities, very easy for me to present. Today, I'm not quite trembling, but almost. Today it is the life of Buddha, the historical Buddha, the Shakyamuni. And we'll do our best. I'll do my best with that. Before we investigate the Buddha and the life of the Buddha, then I'd like to, as I often do, make a context which might make some things in the story easier. And it's about you, me, us, and the world as we understand it. And we had some of this in these sort of paramita teachings and some of our courses on voidness. But basically, we live in a very limited world. So, and then I'd like to share with you an experience I had a long time ago when I was working on the Buddha nature teachings. At that time, I had one of the early computers, you know, the ones that had a big cathode tube, and they were just one color, really 2 colors. Do you remember? Some of you might remember those. They got quite hot. They were full of static electricity. And so I was in front of my screen typing. And there was one of these fat flies that kept landing just on the line of text that I was working on. It seemed, you know, it's like cats, they know where to go, where your attention's focused. And all of a sudden I was stopped in my tracks, thinking, God, that fly's world. It was on the screen because it was warm. There was probably some very minute filth and grease that it could eat. And so it spent a long time there. And you know, the way they do with their front legs, sort of dusting them off like this. And there's me working on Asanga's Maitreya on Buddha nature. I thought, what can that fly? It just can have no idea what's going on this screen that it's shitting on and where it's licking off whatever it can get to eat. It's in its own fly world, which is very limited by its own senses, its own experience. It can't have, what can it understand of a human being with their thoughts, their emotions, what they get up to, writing books. And then out of all the books, these teachings from the future Buddha about how fly is a fly. It has its own limitations. And we see that with other animals. They've all got their physical limitations, but then when we try and communicate with them, we see there's much more resonance, there's much more communication than there is with others. So it helped me intellectually to understand what I've also understood experientially, is that there are other dimensions, and quite honestly, we're like flies as far as they're concerned. There are the Deva realms, there are the bodhisattva realms and levels, arhats, and of course, Buddhas. Our limitation, or part of our limitation, is to do with our education and the world we live in. It's our karma. We've been born into this time of life, and our way of perceiving the world, everything that colors our dualistic perception, has come mainly from science, and that science is very materialistic. There is this thing called matter, which appears to us as a separate external world. And the good thing about this dream of matter is you can measure it with other matter. So you can use measures, machines, thermometers, complicated machines, material machines to measure matter. And nearly all of our science has developed like that. Astroscience, physical science, everything, atomic science, nuclear science. It's based on an idea of matter. Our universe is mapped out. What do you learn at school? Geography. And it's mapped out in time. History. We have these concepts, not just concepts, but realms of concept structures, where time for us is very fixed, and where we are a mind navigating through space of a material universe. That's how it is. That's how we perceive things as, let's say, regular human beings or educated human beings, but only educated this much. We won't go there today, but in other courses we've gone a little bit into, for instance, quantum physics, with the quotes of some of the most famous names of quantum physics, to see, of course, they don't see the world like that. And this whole question of mind and matter, consciousness and matter, what are we talking about with our science? Beautifully explored by some of the greatest non-Buddhist scientific minds of the last almost a century. But anyway, where we're at is as, how can you say, educated, modern Western people with those kind of mindsets. So some things that go beyond those structures are weird for us. That's it. That's the problem. It's not for me to resolve the weirdness. It's just I know when presenting the story of Buddha that there are some things that people, they go, no, can't be, couldn't happen. And well, can only leave you to reflect and ponder. So two things to say before we get to the classical teachings. One is that in Dhamma, our landscape is not really a landscape, but a mindscape. But when we think of all sentient beings, I think most people, when they hear that phrase or try and think of it, their mind sort of goes from where they are through their village, through their county, through their country, out all over the planet, and then maybe to other planets, other galaxies where maybe there are other living beings. It's kind of a landscape, it's material. We think of all those other beings out there in the jungles, in the oceans. It's that kind of I think, maybe I'm wrong, but I think that's how most of us do function. And of course, we have all these amazing documentaries of exploration and of ethnology, anthropology, and so on that help us think like that. The Buddhist universe is not so much material like that. It's a mindscape. You have your heart, your feelings, your thoughts, and the universe appears to you in a certain way. You have your perception. And then there are other people who have their perception. We're looking at it from the inside, and our heart, especially as we develop along the bodhisattva path, feels closer and closer to other beings. It's a heart closeness that's beyond kilometers and billions of light years. Wherever somebody's in the most distant galaxy that would take light many years to go to, in here, in Dharma, they're right next to us. They're inseparable from us. And we feel some minds are hurting, some minds are happy, some minds are very pure, very free, and so on. There is this whole range of mental possibilities. And that's really what we are working with from day one, an understanding of that. So anyway, in the story of the historical Buddha that we're going to start, then there is a larger picture of the universe. It includes, Deva realms and so on. And there is a long, long timescape of the Buddha's own story. So let's get going on some of the classical stuff. I just wanted to say those things about being humble when we listen to this story and accepting that there may be more than just what we can figure out, what we've learned, what fits into the current structures, mind structures that we have, just leaving that open. And you don't have to believe anything. So, where to start? Well, I think the best way to start is with the most, I'm thinking French, excuse me, abordable, the most approachable, the most doable version of Buddha. And we'll approach that through language. Our teachings come from Tibetan Buddhism. They were framed in Tibetan language. One of my life tasks has been as a translator, interpreter for that. So when they translated the word Buddha into Tibetan, they had a problem, very much a translator's problem, where a word in one language, the original language, has different resonances, multiple meanings, or so many implications that come along with that word. When you translate it into your language, you haven't got one word with all those resonances. So you have to make a phrase, a periphrase, a little phrase, or use more words than one. to get the meaning across. So Bud is very much like that. The root Bud in Sanskrit, from which we get Buddha, the person. Bud has several meanings. And one of the meanings, Bud has several meanings. So when they translated that root Bud into Tibetan, the most compact form they could come up with had 2 syllables. Sanje, Sanje, Sanje. Song means several things, but that word song in Tibetan has several resonances. So when it comes to putting the Tibetan of the Sanskrit into English, what does Ken do? Because already song has got resonances. So it means awake. It means got out, became free from. It's like escaped from something, escaped from a prison. And the background meaning of song is pure. It's all about purity. And when we look at Buddha in detail, we look at what are called the qualities of purity. Song. And then Je means fully developed, fully blossomed, fully expanded. When something has reached its fullness, it's like the day at midday with the sun shining and at its hottest. It's like a flower that comes from a bud and becomes its most beautiful. When something comes to as full as it can be, as complete as it can be. So J is very much the kind of feeling of growing and becoming more and more and developing to the full. So the background meaning of J in Sanjay, the word for Buddha in Tibetan, is that there is a completeness, a fullness, purity, completeness. If we look at what is Buddha in those terms, it's very, very helpful for us, and it will speak to all of us in very simple, but in the end, the most meaningful way. So first song, the purity, is, well, it's about our impurities. So what do we mean from that? See, Buddha is somebody who became totally pure, free forever from the prison of impurities, from the limitations to our mind, to our awareness, to our consciousness, all of the limitations that we carry as baggage. So we can understand, I hope you can understand, becoming purer or becoming less pure as an idea. I mean, we're not stuck, we are not fixed. We can become purer human beings. So then, what do we mean by impurity? What is it that we think of as limiting us, as dirtying us in a way? So there we have several things classically. First, there is the karma that we carry, the baggage of karma. And so the heart of all the Buddha's teachings that we're following here is about karma, cause and effect. So here we are, I'm just looking, it says we are 39 people. And I don't think any two of us are even remotely identical. I don't know how many people you can see on your screen, but can you see somebody who's just like you? And even to look at, and then when you look at the details, who were your parents? What did they do? What kind of a family? How did you grow up? Happy, unhappy, siblings, and then all the rest of it. Your story is so unique. This is what we mean by karma. There are reasons behind this, and the Buddha's teaching is that there are immediate reasons from this life, conditioning. There's reasons from past life, the stuff that can survive death and carry over into a future life, make things happen and so on. So we each have our karmic baggage. And in the Buddhist exploration of our path towards freedom, towards enlightenment, then we see it is a question of purifying that karmic baggage stage by stage, level by level, getting rid of the most harmful, and of course keeping the good karma that gives us a precious human life and good qualities. But what is impurity is what damages, causes suffering, brings people, circumstances into our life, into our health that are suffering. So we carry that. That's one thing. And then we have the causes of those karma. Why in past lives did we make such and such karma that has these results in this life? Then we see what we call the klesha, the mind poisons, and it's because of our anger, our lust, our jealousy, pride, ignorance, and so on. So those are ongoing. I think we all have all of them. The soup varies. Here we've got 39 different klesha soups. Some of us will be more angry people, some of us will be more lustful people, some of us more jealous people, and then different mixtures. But that ongoing mental habits and tendencies, so many of them. And that's part of our baggage, impurity. Why? Do we get angry? Do we get jealous and all those things? It's because of the way our mind structures our reality in terms of self-image, other image, our projections on other people, on the world, and our identity projections on ourselves. So that's why we're very upset at him or her, because the way we define them and the way we define ourselves and the relationship, because of those two definitions. So that's duality, triplicity. And that's ongoing as well. It's changing, it changes all the time. But there is a dualistic interpretation of self and other. And all of that's because of ignorance, in the literal sense of not knowing who and what we really are, not knowing the beautiful truth of the true nature of our being, of our mind, which is totally pure. It's Buddha. So anyway, all of that baggage, now most of us are working on. Here we're practicing a Dharma path. We're working on our mind poisons. We're trying to work with our karma, purify our karma through different practices, understand duality, understand the way we formulate the paradigms through which we interpret life, and so on and so on. We're working with all that baggage. So when it says pure, it means that we can see that all of that can be worked with. It's not easy. Some of it can take time, but the way we think about other people, about the universe, and what it is, we can work with, we can make it better, truer, purer. And We can work with our emotions, we can work with our thoughts, we can work with our karmic baggage, and we can work on our ignorance. We have many tools for these things, and in particular, the tool of meditation, which opens up this inner laboratory of the mind, where we can see better and better what's going on. So if we imagine improving, reducing that baggage, and so that we have less and less heavy karma in the next life and the life afterwards. If we imagine reducing the kleshas, so that we're less angry, we're less lustful in the next life, and so on. If we imagine having finer thinking, which understands the power of projection of self and other, and we make that more open, kinder, and so on, to ourselves, to everyone, we can understand purity. Now, if we take that to fullness, to the 100%, then on the journey to that fullness, we can see at this point you become free of this type of rebirth. You become free from the power of karma. You become free from the power of the mind poisons, but they're still there, but disempowered. And then at this point, they just go. And then that's at the point when duality goes, and so on. We can see the whole journey up to nothing left. All of that suffering, the history of suffering and the causes of suffering has gradually been removed and totally removed and uprooted so that it can't come back. The causes of suffering totally gone. So when we say Buddha, that's what we mean. It's the first aspect of Buddha. So there, we can all understand that, I hope. It may seem very ambitious, but then we understand, like it or not, according to the Buddha's teaching, you're going to be reborn. And again, and again, and again. So we've got time. Lots of time. And we can work on it bit by bit, using means, sometimes extraordinary means, boosted, catalyzed, super means, methods. But anyway, it's to understand total purity as a possibility, and not just that hoped for end result, but we can understand that a process moving towards that result is going to be better for us and for everybody we meet. We become less heavy duty for everybody. Good news all round. So it's not a sort of a one leap, well, one morning you wake up Buddha. We're looking at a path, a journey to achieve something that is gradual transformation with many wonderful stages on the way. But with Buddha, we are looking at achieving that totally, the purity. And with the historical Buddha, Shakyamuni, we see him on, and it doesn't matter that it was a him and not a her. We're looking at the mind of that person, a mind which achieved that purity over many, 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 many lifetimes. Went through over what are called 3 long cosmic eons, actually called 3 immeasurable cosmic eons. Gradually achieved total purity, total. So that's the first aspect of Sangye, it's the purity. The other angle is the full development. So we can understand the qualities we have. We're probably quite a nice bunch of quality-filled human beings here this morning, and I'm sure on YouTube too, online, we have good human qualities, ones that are beneficial for us and for others. we have kind hearts, and we know we want to be as generous as we can to help others whenever we can. And then we have some relative degree of peace. Peace is a funny quality, but I could get very detoured with that. What is peace? Peace, in a way, means nothing's happening. So talking about developing it is really about reducing trouble. The troubled mind. That means we're not at peace with ourselves, we're not at peace with other people, we're not at peace with life as it presents itself to us through the power of our karma. There are lots of things that trouble the mind. So they get to us in various ways. So in that sense, we can understand, we can be more and more at peace with everything, or in harmony with everything. Wisdom. We've got some wisdom, probably quite a lot of wisdom. So what would be even wiser? And then we look at the different dimensions of wisdom. It's not just knowledge of things, of facts. It's, when we think of a wise human being, is to do with depth of experience, familiarity with the working material, like a wise craftsperson, a wise gardener, and so on. It comes through a wise social worker. Wisdom comes through experience and so on. So we can imagine more and more. So we have a list of qualities that we're aiming for as Buddhists, mainly loving compassion, wisdom, peace, and power or ability to help others. Those 4 things. If we take away the peace and say that peace is really the first quality of song, of purity, then with the actual qualities we're looking at 3. Loving compassion, wisdom, power to help others. So those developed to their fullness. There couldn't be more wisdom, a wiser person. There couldn't be a kinder heart, a kinder mind, and so on. So when we look at Buddha, the historical person, we're looking at somebody who over hundreds upon hundreds of lifetimes worked on purifying the mind and at the same time developing mind's qualities until that process is complete. We're all working on that, and so there are what are known as inner Buddhas and outer Buddhas. You don't see a lot about this in the texts. It's a teaching I got from Gautama Buddha. So many people ask, well, just a moment, Milarepa. Okay, Milarepa enlightened in one lifetime. So did he go to Bodh Gaya? Did he teach? Did he do like Shakyamuni because he became Buddha? And the answer for Milarepa is that he became what we call an inner Buddha, totally enlightened. His mind couldn't be purer, couldn't have more qualities, those 2 things, sans J. He was enlightened, but he wasn't a Buddha that comes and gives the Dharma to a world, in fact to many worlds, for a long period of time, who sets in motion the wheel of Dharma. Milarepa did it for his own disciples, but all of his, how can you say, universe, Bodh Gaya activity is internal. That won't make much sense unless you have good meditation experience and history. Or if you've done, for instance, if you practice Milarepa sadhana, then you will feel how present Milarepa is today, as though he's right there in front of you. You don't have to go to Tibet and his cave or to Bodh Gaya to meet him as Buddha. When we do the practice, there is an inner world of enlightenment where Milarepa teaches us profound aspects of Dharma. That's an inner Buddha. With Shakyamuni, we're looking at what's called an outer Buddha, and we'll come back to that in the next talk about the three kayas. And we see that Shakyamuni was a Manakaya emanation who had the power and whatever you call it, the karma, the destiny, to set in motion the universal truths we call Dharma in our world that would last for many thousands of years and benefit billions of people. That's called an outer Buddha. It's very tangible. It's in our world, it's in the history. And then we can see Buddhism, how it spread, the billions of people it influenced. We have the scriptures of what the Buddha taught and so on. It's very tangible. The inner Buddhas are much more secret, if you like. But anyway, Shakyamuni Buddha was an outer Buddha. But many people do wonder about that. They say, Shakyamuni Buddha was the fourth one who comes in our particular eon. And that doesn't give us much hope, does it? All that time, all those billions, trillions of years, just 4 Buddhas? What hope is there for us if we're in the queue with all the others? It doesn't work like that. There's inner Buddhas and outer Buddhas, and so many people do achieve the different degrees of enlightenment. But they don't all become outer Buddhas, turning the wheel of Dharma for a whole universe. That's different. So with Shakyamuni Buddha, we are looking at what is called an outer Buddha. So now I've cheated. You see, I've sent you a huge backup document, and for the life of the Buddha, there's no way in 1 hour or less that I can rattle through the life of Buddha in any way that has value for you, a meaning. What I've sent you is, we can say, a universally accepted version of the life of Buddha. Now, it comes from Dr. Sadatissa, somebody I knew, met, and had a tremendous respect for. He was the senior Theravada bhikkhu for Europe back in the 80s, 90s, and very respected Buddhist scholar. And he published a book on the life of Buddha. And so that's very reliable information representing the Theravada view of the life of Buddha. I also sent you, I think, a link to a book which for a long time was out of print. It comes from quite early on. It was, when was it? 1927 it was written. And it's by Edward Thomas, who was an academic in Scotland, and he spent a lot of his life researching the life of Buddha, the different scriptures, what's where, what came earlier, what came later. And so he gives us a very, very useful analysis of the Buddha's life story step by step, so we can get some appreciation of some critical appreciation of what in all the traditional stories we can trust more
or maybe trust a little bit less. That's difficult. The history of the Buddha's story. See, we have what we call the historical canon, which comes from the Buddha's own recorded teachings by his disciples, repeated every rainy retreat, so they remembered them during his lifetime, after his lifetime. And Buddha said very little about his own life in the formal teachings that are recorded. Of course, he was 45 years with his Sangha, and he talked about himself, talked about his life. They asked him questions. So after his passing, in the scriptures that aren't his directly recorded speech, but the ones who said, oh, I heard the Buddha say this, well, this is what I understand about it. Then we have what are called the agamas. I'm not quite sure where the stress is, but anyway, the agamas. And then other stuff comes later, centuries later. And the Buddha's life story is an amazing story. And you know what storytellers do with amazing stories. They make them even more amazing, and they just imagine how it must have been. So, you know, the story of like the Buddha, the night he leaves the palace, and when he knows he's got a newborn son, and he'd like to go and see, just for once, to see his son's face, but then the son's sleeping in the mother's arms and he might wake the mother up, then he can't leave the palace, and how he feels. And so that gets embroidered quite a lot. There's nothing in what the Buddha said about that. Nothing. It's the sort of the storytellers, but it helps us to appreciate something. So the way we look at the Buddha's life story is in 12 deeds. I've only got 10 fingers, so in 12 deeds. Can you have 2 ears as well? 10 fingers and 2 ears. 12 deeds of the Buddha. And so these are important for us because each deed makes his teaching have more impact and have a more lasting impact. Beside the 12 deeds, when we go into the Jataka stories are stories Buddha told of his former lives to his various disciples, often in the context of telling the story and then saying, in that former life, you were this one and I was that one, and this is what happened. So they're collected together. There are hundreds of stories, 500, 600, 700 stories of Buddha's former lives in the Jataka stories. But in there, we find the plot. It's like, you know, they do Star Wars and then afterwards they make a prequel, say, where did this character come from? Where did this one come from? What's their story? So in the Buddha's story, you have key players like his parents, but in particular, his wife, his mother, his son, some of his main disciples, Shariputra, Moggallana, and then Mahakashyapa, and so on. They were there in former lives. They knew that what even the Theravada system calls the bodhisattva, the Buddha, was going to become Buddha. And so they promised, when you are Buddha, one of them, I want to be your wife. You'll have a wife. You'll have a child. You'll leave the world and leave your wife and child. I want to be the wife. Another one who wanted to be his mother, Queen Mahamaya, and so on. So we have these karmic stories developing. It's not really karma, it's good karma. Dharma stories developing, where the actors in the story have their connection with the Buddha and have made a deep promise to be part of the enlightenment story when it happens. what will follow is the Mahayana version of the story. So the first part is shared with all the Buddhist traditions. The Theravada is that long, long, long ago, 3 cosmic eons ago, there was the former incarnation of our Buddha, who was already a yogi, a siddha. He'd done lots of practices that gave him special abilities. He had a lot of insight, but he knew for sure that there was something missing, that there was further to go. And at that time, there was a Buddha whose name was Dipankara. And so there are various stories about his meeting with Dipankara. In the Theravada stories, the Buddha was coming to the town and people wanted to make the road very nice, clean, smooth. They each had a little section of road to tidy up, probably with potholes and mud, and goodness knows what's mud in the story. And he couldn't manage to finish his bit of the road. So when Buddha came along, he says he actually put his body to cover a muddy hole so that Buddha could walk over him. That's in the Theravada version. And anyway, he had great faith and devotion in the Buddha. And then in other versions, we don't get that. We get him making an offering where he's a very poor yogi. And he's so poor, he doesn't have anything. And so he hears Buddha is coming. He feels this is so important. And so he finds some dried aromatic grass, twists it up into primitive incense, and then he picks wild vegetables and makes a soup. And he goes to the Buddha, he offers the soup, he offers the burning grass as incense, and that's when he takes his bodhisattva vow. But the point is, the Buddha at that time, it's a very, very important point. What was it that impressed Shakyamuni, who he was at that time, was his presence. Was his presence. It wasn't blah, 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 teachings, talking, he'd heard about that, but there was just this totally perfect, radiant being. Those of us who had the privilege of knowing the 16th Karmapa, and you see many accounts from different Rinpoches who knew him, they all said he was so special. He was like Buddha on earth. And he didn't need to teach, to talk, just being with him in his presence taught you everything. I spent 6 months with him every day. Every day was like a miracle. Every day this radiant presence was teaching whomever he met, not just Buddhists, everyone. I've seen archbishops kind of mind-boggled. They became like little children in his presence. They just saw the radiance. Amazing. So anyway, Dipankara, Buddha's presence. And so the bodhisattva, who was taking his first bodhisattva vow, said, I want to be like you. And I'll do everything it takes to become like you. So he took his bodhisattva promise. And so there's a whole story around that. We don't have time for it. How Dipankara, his disciples and so on reacted, made predictions that in such and such a future time, Shakyamuni, he'd become the Buddha Shakyamuni in our world system. So he set out on a long journey that goes over hundreds of lifetimes in 3 different cosmic world systems, each one stretching over a long time. And during that period, he has in particular encounters with 24, 25 Buddhas, especially, and serving them, receiving teachings from them, progressing with them. Of those 25, 3 were in
our cosmic world system. And they were in our world system, in this kalpa, it's called a good age. They were the three Buddhas we had before Shakyamuni. So Shakyamuni is our fourth Buddha. So they were called Konagama. Kakusanda was the first. Konagama and Kashyapa were the three. So he served those, but also another 21, 22 who were in different worlds where he was reborn and reborn. So he ends up where? Well, this is where the Mahayana story differs from the Hinayana story, Theravada story. When we have our Mahayana understanding of the path and the 10 bodhisattva levels, you end up in what is known as the highest state. And the highest state, the word for highest in Sanskrit is, and I can't pronounce it, I don't know if anybody can, is something like akantha, kanistha. It just means the highest, so it's easier in the English. It's as pure and as high and as refined as it can be, and that's where Sakyamuni Buddha achieves enlightenment. Transits from the end of the 10th bodhisattva level to becoming a Buddha. And from that state, in his mind, which is inseparable from the limitless universe, that's what Buddha means. You reach the primordial mind that embraces everything, the initial primordial purity. It's always been there, is there, always will be there. So from that state, because of all his previous karmic connections made in those hundreds of lifetimes, like we're making karmic connections now, then he manifests amongst other places in our world. So then we zoom into the details. Where was he before he came to our world? And there he was in one of the Deva realms, which is called Tushita. And in Tushita, he was teaching a topic called the 100 Doors of Dharma. And then he had what is called a five-fold vision, that the time was right for him to come to our planet and to turn the wheel of Dharma, to teach Dharma. And so that's when he leaves Maitreya Bodhisattva, who was part of his teaching entourage in Tushita. He empowers him to carry on the teachings and to become his regent in Tushita. And then he emanates into our world. That word is important. He emanates. A bit hard to understand. So we'll come back to that soon, very soon. So then he has these 5 visions. It's called 5 visions, doesn't mean he just knew time's right to come here. So it says the time was right. So in the story of our world, and really means the story of all the people, it's karma, to be born in our world, in this our world's history over thousands and thousands of years, that was the right time to come and teach. So the time was right. Normally it says, the average lifespan was right, but that's in another big cosmic picture. We won't go there. The time was right is the key thing. Second, the place was right, which is northern India. It's a place from which the Dharma in which it could flourish and from which it could spread. So trade routes, all that kind of thing. Exactly what happened. Buddhism reached Greece quite quickly because of the trade routes. Went so far, traveled trade routes to China, to Russia, to Greece. So India was a civilized country
when we look at the world at that time. And it's a time when so much happened. There was Lao Tzu in China. There were the very, very first of the Greek philosophers, Confucius, and so on. It's that period of time where the world got a lot of its faith, let's say. So the time was right, place was right, India. And then the entourage was right, which meant that gathering in India, or about to gather through the power of their karma, were the ones he would teach. There's a lovely, there's different religion, it's in Sufism, but there's a book called The Conference of the Birds, where all the birds come to one place to have a conference. So it's all of these disciples with their different karma and different rebirths and different wherevers. They were all gathering, or about to gather. So the entourage was right. Those, I mean, what's the point of teaching if people don't understand it? You need worthy people. And they were on their way. The ones he'd met in past lives and made connections with and so on. Then the next thing, the mother was right. That's a very interesting story. She was mainly reborn to be his mother. To be the mother of a Buddha requires a certain purity, strength, karma, if you put it that way. So he could see she was there. And then the last thing is the caste of his parents was correct, because in a time, in a place where there was a caste system, he needed to be born in a caste where he would be respected and where his teachings could have impact. So it says he was born as a prince, the son of a king. Some of the kingdoms were quite small at the time, but as Prince Gautama, then he would be able to influence, as he did. He made some really society-changing things. People could come to him, his religion, from any caste, in a place where the caste system was so strong, so strong. He allowed women to join the order, which was not happening at the time. So he needed the oomph which came from being born into a royal family. So there's the 5 visions. And then they're not actually in the 12 deeds, that's all before. So the first deed is coming from Tushita to our world, appearing in our world. Second deed is being born to his mother. Many people have problems with this because it says he was born from her right side. He took 7 steps in each of the directions. He spoke immediately, and people say that's not possible. Medically, no way. So however you think of it, this is where we get into the difficulties. And it doesn't matter so much when you look at Thomas's book and where these stories came from, where were they first said, who by, and so on. Very interesting research. But anyway, if we follow, because I'm telling you what Tibetans believe, right? I'm telling you what Tibetans believe. They believe the Mahayana version. In the Mahayana version, when in the first deed he emanates from Tushita, he maintains a Tushita body. He doesn't stop. His whole life in our world is not in a regular human body. He's in a Tushita Deva body, divine body, and that's why, out of compassion, not to give his mother pain, she just felt a bit wobbly and had to hang on to a tree, it says in the story. Then he beams out from her side. Many other devas come and pay him reverence, and people hear him declaring that he is the Buddha come to teach in the world the finest of human beings. So, if you think about vocal cords and learning language and brains and things like that, of course it doesn't work. And so you might think, this is where I stop. I'm not carrying on with this story. It's... I saw, was it one famous scientist of the last century? He said, religion is something invented by people who are afraid of the dark. And somebody retorted, oh, maybe people like you say that because you are those who are afraid of the light. And this is quite an interesting comment. Why am I saying this? Well, if you've had vaster experiences, why I told you at the beginning about the fly on the screen and the different levels of reality that are just so different from ours. If you have some experience of that, then this makes absolute sense. It's not extraordinary. It's extraordinary for a mind that's been based on material science and is very limited. It's not extraordinary for a mind that's had bigger experience. I'd like to share with you things I've shared with you many times. Some of you, we've been together for a couple of years now here. But perception. I've told you many times the story of people I took to see the 16th Karmapa. One of them comes out, she's Italian. She said, I never knew he spoke the most perfect Italian. I never knew he spoke I never knew he even knew 2 words of Italian. But she heard a 20-minute teaching, just what she wanted to hear, needed to hear, in Italian. Totally moved, inspired by it. In that same group, somebody saw him as Jesus, saw the 16th Karmapa as Jesus, traveling around with him. Many people had visions. So we're not talking materially about what's there. We're talking about what people experience. Akon Rinpoche was shorter than me, quite a bit shorter than me. I'm not big, but he was shorter. Once we had a journalist from the Tatla magazine, UK magazine, who had met him in Tibet and wanted to come to Samiling to do an interview. And my job was to sort of prime her before she actually went in for the interview with. And when she said, gosh, I never forget the meeting with him. He was huge, as big as a barn door. I said, are you sure it was Akon Rinpoche and not another Lama? I said, he's shorter than me. He said, no, huge, like this. And so then she went in to meet him, and she had the same huge feeling, but at the same time she could see he was short. So it took her a few minutes to work that one out, but she hadn't mistaken. What people experience in the presence of powerful minds can be almost anything. Can be almost anything. So anyway, what people present at the birth of the Buddha experienced was this being born on rays of light, and then they heard him say. They heard him say. And that's what they saw. So anyway, that's the second deed, is the birth. So if you look at your support document, you'll see the rest of the deeds. Time's running out very quickly today, so I need to go through them just so you've got the. So the first deed, he comes from Tushita. The second deed is actually he's entering the womb. So there's a whole story with that. The mother dreams of a white elephant with 6 tusks, and then also she's told by Buddhas and bodhisattvas that she needs to from that time on, lead a very pure life, celibate life, and so on. Anyway, he enters the mother's womb. Second deed. Third deed, he's born painlessly, as I just described. Fourth deed, he grows up, and so he grows up a very gifted child. Now, just a second, I've lost my screen. Very gifted child, which means that he's better than everybody. Why? Well, it means he was better at sports, archery, wrestling, the mathematics they had at the time. They had quite good astronomy at the time, and mathematics. And so all the things that people grew up to, he grew up the most gifted child, quite sort of famous for it. Now, here we come into why, is because if he was a loser, and then with all the other qualities, he grew up so handsome. He had this tushita body. Everyone who saw him couldn't believe. And even he says in the text, his cousin Devadatta, who became his chief rival, his cousin said, I can't see the difference between him and me, except that he has all this light around his body. But other than the light, can't see how he's that different. The tushita body meant that he didn't appear fixed. Whoever met him, they saw him as just a bit taller than themselves. It says it's about an arm's length taller, and so on. But he was handsome, he was strong, he was intelligent, he was gifted. Now afterwards, when he leaves the royal family and then goes off and becomes an ascetic, if he was just anybody, a pauper who says, you know, wealth and riches aren't everything, fame's not everything, money's not everything, sex and having a beautiful wife, not everything. If he was just a loser saying those things, well, that's what a loser would say, isn't it? Somebody who was ugly, stupid, all of those things. If they say that doesn't count, is one thing. But if you got the person who was famous, if they had Hello magazine or whatever you've got in your country, that talks all the time about film stars and royalty, he'd have been in the magazines all the time as a kind of a hero, sports hero, royalty hero, cleverness hero, all those things. When somebody who's been all those things and says, yes, but that's not it, then people can believe it because he's had more of all of those things than any of them. So anyway, he grows up gifted, and then he grows up, which means that he comes to the time when he has to honor his parents, and so he gets married, and he has, as was the custom in those days in that place, he has not just one main wife, he has one main wife, two other wives, and depending on the versions, various sizes of harem, whatever you say. So, that's mainly the point of beauty, sexual relationships. He had what I suppose many men would dream of. And that's the point. So afterwards, when he says yes, but, and people can believe it, his main wife, Yasodhara, was the most beautiful woman of the time, and so on and so on. So anyway, he does that.
Sixth deed is that that needs to come to an end, and he needs to show the triggers that set us all on the Dharma path. So I'm looking at the clock. So he sees birth, he sees aging, sickness, and death. And then he sees, the fourth thing he sees is an ascetic, someone who's renounced the world and wandering. Yeah, that's that deed. He has to do that. That inspires him to leave everything behind. It's a long story. That's why you've got the text. Then the next step, the seventh deed, is he practices meditation and asceticism. Now let's go back to his birth. So he was born from his mother. 7 days later, his mother died. She'd fulfilled her karmic destiny duty. And so he was brought up by his birth mother's sister, Rajapati. When he was born, because there had been the dream and the signs during the pregnancy from the mother, the king had various sages. There's a whole story about sages who examine the child, who've been called to examine because he's an extraordinary child. He's got this special body. And so most of them say this will either be a great king in the future, or else he'll be a Buddha and teach the world. Most of them give both options. There were quite a lot of sages he called. But there was one called Kondana who said, no, for sure he'll be a Buddha. But because the other sages had said that, then the two possibilities, he led a very sheltered upbringing where aging, sickness, and death were screened off from him as much as his parents could manage. It's an incredible story when you read the detail. I mean, just as a story, it's an incredible story. So anyway, I need to quickly go through the 12 Ds, which is why I'm rushing. So he practices meditation and asceticism. Now, the reason we jump back to his birth and the sage who said for sure he'll be this through reading the signs on his body, that sage, when he hears that he's left the palace, goes to join him with 4 of his own disciples, and they become the 5 ascetics that the Buddha practices asceticism with. First, they go to a teacher who'd mastered a meditation that we came across in the meditation paramita called nothingness, or nothing whatsoever. A teacher called Alara Kalama. And he goes to that teacher. Very great meaning in this. He doesn't do it all by himself. He goes to the 2 most famous teachers of his day. He shows the need to resort to teachers, to gurus. And he goes to Alara Kalama. He meditates. He becomes his equal. And he says, what's next? Can this free us from the cycle of death, aging, sickness, and death? And Alara says, no. So then he leaves him, he goes to another teacher called Uddaka. Uddaka has perfected the next meditation in that stage of the 4 formless meditations, which is called neither cognition nor absence of cognition. Same thing, he soon exhausts what that teacher can teach, and he has no more to teach. So then he goes off with his companions to practice as intensely as they can asceticism, sitting in the burning sun, going without food, all that could be asceticism. And then after 6 years of going to those teachers, practicing with them, and then practicing asceticism, he realizes that asceticism isn't the way. And he collapses, and he accepts rich food from somebody. And his 5 companions leave him. They think he's given up. And so then you get the story of him meeting with the girl who comes to the tree where he's sitting and gives him this very, very enriched milk and rice and honey. And so that's the end of his ascetic period. Why an ascetic period? Because if he'd practiced more asceticism than anyone, nobody could say, when he says that's not it, nobody could argue with him. If he'd have just lived in luxury as a prince and then gone and taught, then India, which was so, asceticism was so respected at the time, people wouldn't have listened. But because he was more ascetic than the most ascetics, then people would listen. Then the 8th deed, he goes to Vajrasana, which is now Bodh Gaya. And that's where he finishes his Dharma journey, where he transits from 10th bodhisattva level to full Buddhahood. There's a whole story about meeting the boy with the kusha brass and so on. And then deed number 9 is he manifests enlightenment. Sorry, number 10. He goes to Bodh Gaya, number 9. Just a moment. Goes to Bodh Gaya. That's number 8. Number 9, he overcomes Mara, all the negative and harmful forces. And then that all happens just in the night time. He goes to Bodh Gaya, seat of enlightenment, sits down in the evening. All of the negative forces of this world come to try and distract him from this transit to 10th bodhisattva level to Buddhahood. It's the last tiny threads of his own inner causes of suffering that go at that time. So the next morning at dawn, he is enlightened, he manifests enlightenment. 11th deed, he teaches for 45 years. And then 12th deed, he passes away from this world, leaving the Dharma as his successor. Not leaving somebody as his successor, but leaving his teachings. So we'll stop there for today. We have to stop there because of the time. I feel bad about it because each bit of the story is such a lovely story. It's an amazing story. And that's why I sent you all those details in the small print, so you can enjoy it and read it, and then read it from another angle. If you like Thich Nhat Hanh, his Old Path, White Clouds is a very nice book about the Buddha's life as well. And one can savor the life. But from the Mahayana point of view, those 12 deeds are there to make his teaching, which is in a way the most important thing, be strong. I mean, his life and the wonderful people who had the opportunity to meet him in his life is extraordinary, but it didn't last. He lived for 80 years. His teachings for thousands and thousands of years. So his life needed to be a perfect example, a perfect beginning for his teachings in this world, without a blemish, and then to make them strong in some of the ways that I've explained today. That's the main point. In Buddhism, although we use the word the Buddha or Sanje in Tibetan, the main idea is he's called the teacher. The whole point is that Buddha is not a savior. If Buddhas were saviors, we wouldn't be here. We'd have been saved. They would have, and we wouldn't even have been born. It would have happened ages ago. If Buddhas could remove the suffering of the world and the suffering of rebirth and the suffering of aging and sickness, their loving hearts would have done it ages ago. They can't. They can't. All they can do is teach us how to get rid of our own suffering, and then if we're bodhisattvas, not just get rid of our own suffering, but develop the skills to teach others how to get rid of their suffering. So when we come in the third talk to look at Buddha nature, this core true nature of our being, we'll see that when we look at the loving compassion, the wisdom, and the power is the power to teach, to help others help themselves. Of course, we can help each other. We can help each other materially and so on. But to get out of suffering in the long term, forever, to get out of the cycle of being born, having a body, then once you've got a body, you have to age, die, be unwell. Buddha cannot do that for any of us. So for us, Buddha is the teacher. When we come to the course later on the Sangha, and the main members of the Sangha, we'll see how when he passed, the 12th day, passed into Nirvana, then he didn't appoint somebody to be the next teacher. He appointed somebody to be the elder of the Sangha. That's not the same thing. He specifically said, when I'm gone, my teachings are what replace me, not somebody. Very, very important. So anyway, I've really used a lot of time, and let's dedicate. May whatever virtue was created by this session contribute to the state of omniscience being attained, by the main enemy, mind's defilements, being completely defeated. Through that, may each and every sentient being become freed from the ocean of existence, troubled by the waves of rebirth, aging, sickness, and death. May this precious bodhicitta arise in those in whom it's not arisen. May its development know no setbacks, and may it increase ever more and more. Through this virtue, may we quickly achieve Mahamudra and establish every single sentient being in that same accomplishment. So, as I said, a very unsatisfying talk for me. I would like to have had hours and days, and we could have all enjoyed the research and going into the details of the story, and we could have argued about it and talked about it and said all sorts of interesting things. But in terms of the Buddha and the three aspects we are studying, Buddha the person, Buddha the three kayas, Buddha nature inside us, then they are some of the key points about the Buddha's life, which is really the end page of the whole book of lives, going from that first taking the bodhisattva vow. If you've got any comments or questions, we've got some little bit of time for them.
Yeah, hi Ken. I've got 5 questions.
I'm sure.
well, at least 5, but I'll only ask the main one. it's a bit complex. And in a nutshell, it's, are the Theravadins using the terms Buddha, enlightenment, and bodhisattva in the same way as the Mahayanas? Indeed, are the Mahayanas using the term Buddha in the same way? You mentioned in the talk the difference between inner and outer Buddhas, which was very illuminating. You used Milarepa and Shakyamuni as examples of two different types of Buddha. But in terms of what how the Theravadins use them, in the intro on the module, you state that an enlightened one is one who has an unfaltering realization of voidness. I guess that word unfaltering is very key there. And in page 5, the Jataka tales of Buddha's former lives say as a bodhisattva, so they're using the term bodhisattva there. And then there's the story of the 7 Brahmins who predicted he could become a king or a Buddha. And then Kandana says he will achieve enlightenment and become a Buddha. So are they using the term, are Theravadins using the term enlightenment exactly in the same sense as Mahayanas, or are they referring just to the state of Arhat?
Yeah, that's it's not a difficult question to answer, but there's not a 2-word, 3-word answer, because you need to look into it more fully. They certainly use the word bodhisattva. They certainly go back to his past lives and other and the Buddha Dipankara and so on like that. And they call him bodhisattva. So I remember, for instance, I was in a conference with Dr. Sadatissa, the one who gave us that life story. And when he started his presentation, he stood up and he joined his hands like this. And he said, I bow down to the bodhisattva. So he definitely uses the terms. And actually, he had tears in his eyes. He had such a devotion. It was moving to see. And that's the first time I met a very distinguished Theravada and realized that they have this idea of the bodhisattva. When they say Buddha, they mean Buddha in the etymology that I gave, someone who is totally pure and who has all the qualities manifest, but purity and qualities in the way they understand them. Right? So in Mahayana Buddhism, we take our understanding of what Buddha had still left to purify beyond the arhat level of purification. There are more things to purify in terms of ignorance and in terms of these called very fine karmic traces. They're called vasana in Sanskrit. And so, and then in terms of wisdom and accomplishment, he achieved this perfect understanding of voidness. So for them, voidness or emptiness, or shunyata, is emptiness of ego. It's seeing through ego illusions and realizing there is no lasting, permanent, independent, personal self. And so he was free from suffering. They see him as free from suffering, as being the supreme arhat. In Mahayana, there is more what we call veils of wisdom that he removed, which is understanding the shunyata, the emptiness of everything, not just of the personal self, but of every dharma, of every single thing. So they use the word Buddha, but their understanding of the two aspects, purity and qualities, are different. They use the word bodhisattva very definitely. And then what actually Kondana and the sages said in terms of vocabulary I don't think there's enough historical scriptural evidence for us to really be polemical about it. They said he will become a whatever, wisest man in the world, the greatest, what? Because Buddha in Sanskrit, it means awakened, the most awakened being. I mean, now when we look back, we've had the life of the Buddha, we've got our bodhisattva understanding of what a Buddha is. They didn't. They were in a world where there hadn't been Dharma yet. So if they said Buddha in their language, they mean the most awakened, enlightened being. So then his disciples, his Shravaka disciples, later to become Theravada, they would have understood that as attained arhatship. But then we have to go further, because there's not just becoming an arhat. Arhat or nirvana is a negative definition. It means what's no longer there, no more suffering, no more causes of suffering. Then amongst the arhats, there are what are called ornamented arhats and unornamented arhats. The ornamented ones, beside being free from the whole process of causality of suffering, have so much wisdom into things, so many skills of wisdom. They're incredibly wise, intelligent. So, they could have seen him as not just free from suffering, but also of all the people free from suffering, the wisest. I don't know if that helps.
Yes, it does.
Brings up
Yes,
more questions, I'm sure. Yes.
I'll let somebody else ask questions.
Ken, could I just ask a wee practical question?
Of course, Susan, yeah.
The link you mentioned to Edward Thomas's book, is that within the text of the module, or is that a separate link? Because I don't seem to have it.
I think it's the reference, it's the book reference. But
It's
since
the book
then,
reference.
Neil did some research. It was out of print for many years, but apparently it's back in print now. You can get it through Amazon.
Ooh, that's great. Thank you very much.
I think it's called The Life of Buddha by Edward Thomas.
Edward Thomas. Thank you, Ken.
It's old. I mean, it's 1920. That's what, it's almost 100 years ago that was written. And in the last 30, 35 years, there's just been so much incredible research into Buddhist history from all sorts of angles, linguistic, archaeological. In the 1990s, they found these Sanskrit texts, which are like the Buddhist Dead Sea Scrolls in Pakistan and Afghanistan. A lot's happened, and it would take a few more Thomases to untangle all of that and give us much more insight into Buddhist history. Okay, maybe then we've finished for today, unless, Neil, you've got another question. I used a lot of time for the talk, and I realized I needed to say a bare minimum, at least, so that I don't get sued by the Buddhist authorities.
Well, I'll just make one comment, or I don't know if it's a question. If you look on the famous internet about the birth date of Siddhartha, there's an amazing range from the earliest one I can find was 1029 BC, and it runs through to 448 BC. I know your text plumps for the sort of the most common 560 or 563 BC.
Yeah.
So that's an extraordinary range of 600 years during which he might have been born. But what I found interesting was that they all seem to agree on the fact that he lived for 80 years. So there's a strange disconnect between knowing how long he lived for and when he was actually born.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what the notions of precision in history were in the different countries, the different Buddhist cultures. What you need to, I think one thing one needs to factor in is when you look at the history of Buddhism and like when it went in a big way from Sri Lanka to Southeast Asia, we're more than 1600 years after the Buddha. When it went to China, and what you see is, like when it went to China, it was carried to China by 3, 4, 5 key people. And they're responsible for a lot of things, what they decide to share from what they've learned from their time in India, or what they feel is appropriate, not appropriate, what they keep in, what they keep out, their own understanding of history. They were using different calendars, different time cycles. That's really complicated. But historically, I don't think anyone thinks the Buddha didn't exist as a historical person. And then the main reference we have is King Ashoka. So King Ashoka, who set up these pillars in India, he's just 200 years after the Buddha. He's in the same country, he's just after the Buddha, and he puts up a pillar which says, it was in this place that, whatever it was, 200, 300 years ago, Buddha Shakyamuni was born. So that's probably one of the most reliable references. And the dates, I think the dates I used come from a Buddhist conference which was held in the middle of the last century, where they realized they all had such different understandings of how long ago the Buddha was, that key scholars from the Zen, different Southeast Asian countries, Tibet, I don't know if it was represented or not, but anyway, they came together to actually decide on dates, and that's the dates that I use.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so nice to see those of you I didn't have time to say hello to at the beginning, and it's very late now, so we'd already dedicated, and we'll carry on with Buddha next week. Be well.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, Ken. Cheers, Ken.
Thank you, Ken. Bye.
Tra everyone.